The village of Hollow Creek sat quietly at the edge of the Blackthorn Woods, far enough from the packlands that most people there had forgotten wolves ever ruled the north at all. It was a small place, with narrow dirt roads and wooden houses that leaned slightly with age. At the very end of the last road, where the trees grew thick and the sunlight struggled to reach the ground, stood a small cottage with a blue door and a garden full of herbs. This was where Elira Voss had lived for the past 5 years. She was known in the village simply as the healer. People came to her with fevers, wounds, and aching bones, and she treated them with quiet hands and quieter words. Few people knew her real name had once meant something else, somewhere else. Fewer still knew that the boy who lived with her, a serious little 5-year-old with storm-gray eyes, was not just her son by love, but by blood, and that his father was a man who did not even know he existed. Elira had built her whole life around forgetting, but some things refused to stay buried. That morning began like any other. She woke before sunrise, ground herbs into paste for old Mrs. Kane's swollen knee, and left a plate of warm bread on the table for Wren, who was still curled beneath his blanket, one small foot sticking out from under the covers. "Wren," she called softly, "time to wake up." He groaned and pulled the blanket over his head, and Elira smiled despite herself. He looked so much like his father in moments like this, stubborn, even half asleep. She pushed the thought away, the way she always did. Thinking about Cade Ashgrove did nothing but ache. By mid-morning, the village was buzzing with unusual news. Strangers had come, not merchants, not travelers looking for a place to rest, but soldiers, dressed in the deep green and silver of the Blackthorn pack. Elira's chest tightened when she heard the whispers outside her window. She told herself it meant nothing. Packs sent soldiers to human villages sometimes, to trade, to patrol borders, to remind people who really held power in the north. But when one of the soldiers stopped by her garden gate and looked at the mark burned faintly into the wood above her door, a small healer's symbol she had carved herself, using a technique only taught within the Blackthorn pack, Elira's hands went cold. He didn't say anything. He only stared for a long moment, then walked away. She knew, in that instant, that her quiet life had just cracked open. That night, she barely slept. She lay awake listening to the wind through the trees, listening to Wren's soft breathing in the next room, and thinking about the day, 5 years ago, when she had packed a single bag and walked away from everything she had ever known. She had loved Cade once. Maybe she still did, somewhere beneath all the fear. He had been kind to her in a world that had not been kind at all, an Omega, with no strong bloodline, tolerated by the pack but never truly welcomed. On the night before the great battle that shattered the northern packs, they had been together, not just in body, but in something deeper, a bond neither of them had planned or fully understood. He had promised her, in the dark, that things would be different once the fighting ended. Then the battle happened, and everything changed. Cade was struck down, nearly killed, and when he woke, pieces of his memory were simply gone. The elders who ran the pack council in his weakened state saw their chance. They did not want an Omega with no bloodline standing beside their future Alpha. They told Elira, quietly and coldly, that if she truly cared for Cade, she would disappear before she caused him more pain than he could survive. They never told him she was carrying his child. They never gave her the choice to stay and fight for her place. She had been young, frightened, and utterly alone, so she left. She built a new life in Hollow Creek, farther from the packlands than she had ever imagined settling. She named her son Wren after the small, quiet bird that had once made a home in the eaves of her family's old house. She raised him with stories about the woods, with lessons about kindness and courage, and she never once told him the truth about his father. What was there to tell? That his father was a king who did not remember loving her at all? The knock came at dusk the next evening. Elira was stirring a pot of soup over the fire when she heard it. 3 slow, deliberate raps against her blue door. Her whole body went still. Wren was sitting at the table, drawing shapes in the dirt of an old wooden board, humming quietly to himself. "Stay here," she whispered, though her voice shook more than she wanted it to. She opened the door only a crack at first, and then, seeing who stood there, opened it the rest of the way without meaning to. The breath left her lungs entirely. Cade Ashgrove stood on her doorstep, taller than she remembered, his face harder, older, carved by years of leading a broken pack through its slow recovery. He wore no crown, no obvious mark of his title, only a simple traveling cloak, but there was no mistaking the weight he carried in his shoulders, the quiet authority in the way he stood. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. His eyes searched her face, as though trying to place a memory just out of reach. "Elira," he said finally, and the sound of her real name in his voice nearly broke something in her chest. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but a report reached me. A healing mark, a technique only my pack teaches." He paused, his gaze flickering past her, into the warm little house behind her. "I told myself it was nothing. I rode 2 days to prove myself wrong." That was when Ren appeared in the doorway behind her, curious about the voices, clutching his wooden board against his chest. Cade went completely still. Elira watched the exact moment recognition struck him. Not memory, not yet, but something instinctual and undeniable. Ren had his father's storm-gray eyes, the same set of his jaw, even the same small furrow between his brows when he was thinking hard about something. "Elira," Cade's voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Who is this?" She could have lied. She had rehearsed lies for this exact moment 100 times over the years, imagining scenarios just like this one, and always deciding she would protect her son with whatever story kept him safest. But standing there, watching Cade's face, she found she could not do it. Not anymore. "This is Ren," she said quietly. "He's 5 years old." She watched him count backward in his head, watched the color shift in his face as the timeline settled into place. "He's mine," Cade said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." The silence that followed felt endless. Ren, sensing the tension without understanding it, pressed closer to Elira's side. She rested a protective hand on his shoulder. "Please," she said, before Cade could speak again. "Whatever you're feeling right now, please don't frighten him." Something in Cade's expression cracked at that. Not anger, but grief, sharp and sudden. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to Ren's height, careful and unhurried, the way a person moves around something fragile they are afraid of breaking. "Hello," he said gently. "My name is Cade." Ren studied him with the frank, unblinking curiosity only children seem to possess. "You have the same eyes as me," he said. Cade's breath caught. "Yes," he said softly. "I suppose I do." Elira felt tears rise in her throat, unexpected and unwelcome. She had imagined this moment so many times, in nightmares, and in secret hopes she never allowed herself to fully examine. She had not expected it to feel like this, not like disaster, but like something long overdue finally arriving. That night, after Ren had fallen asleep, worn out from the excitement of a stranger who somehow felt familiar, Elira and Cade sat outside on the cottage steps beneath the stars. The woods were quiet around them, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the night wind. "I don't remember," Cade admitted, staring at his hands. "Not clearly. Fragments. Your voice. Fire. A promise I made and then somehow broke without ever knowing it." He looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes was raw and real. "I would never have let them send you away, if I had known." "You didn't know," Elira said. "The elders made sure of that." "That doesn't make it right." "No," she agreed quietly. "It doesn't?" She told him everything then. The cold conversation with the elders, the threats wrapped in gentle words, the long walk out of pack territory with nothing but a bag on her shoulder and a secret growing inside her that she had been too frightened to even name aloud. Cade listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his hands curling into fists against his knees more than once. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I am not that wounded, manipulated man anymore," he said finally. "I have spent 5 years learning to rule, without letting others decide who deserves my loyalty and who doesn't. The elders who sent you away no longer hold the power they once did. I made certain of that, long before I ever knew why it mattered so much to me. And now? Now, he said, I am asking you, not telling you. I don't expect you to return to the Packlands tonight, or tomorrow, or even this season. I don't expect forgiveness I haven't earned, but I am asking for the chance to know my son. And if you'll allow it, the chance to know you again too, if there's anything left of what we had. Alira looked out at the dark line of trees, at the small garden she had grown with her own hands, at the life she had built entirely alone, because she believed she had no other choice. She thought of all the nights she had lain awake, wondering if she had made the right decision, wondering what it would mean for Ren to grow up never knowing where half of himself came from. "He asks about his father sometimes," she said quietly. "I never knew what to tell him." "Then let me tell him myself," Cade said. "In whatever way you think is right, in whatever time it takes." She turned to look at him, this man who had once been the center of a life she thought she'd lost forever, now sitting beside her on the same worn steps where she had spent so many quiet evenings alone. "You can stay through tomorrow," she said finally. "We'll see how it goes from there." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was a door left open, just slightly, after 5 years of keeping it firmly shut. The next morning, Ren woke Cade up before the sun had even fully risen, eager to show him the best climbing tree in the woods behind the cottage, the one with branches shaped perfectly for small hands and feet. Alira watched from the kitchen window as the two of them walked together toward the tree line, Ren talking excitedly, Cade listening with the kind of complete attention that made her chest ache in a way that was no longer entirely painful. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't built entirely around hiding. She didn't know what would come next, whether Cade's memory would fully return, whether the pack would ever truly accept a boy born outside its careful bloodlines, whether the fragile thing rebuilding between her and Cade could survive everything still standing in its way. But as she watched her son laugh beneath the old climbing tree, his father's hand steady on the branch above him, she felt something loosen in her chest that had been tightly wound for 5 long years. The sun rose fully over Hollow Creek, gold light spilling through the trees, touching the blue door of the cottage, where a secret had finally come into the light. It was not the end of their story, it was only, finally, the beginning.